So what do you say, Kelsey? Should we get started?
Yeah, it's a
Oh,
couple minutes after the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. People are still coming in, but we'll go ahead and uh, kick off with some introductions. So welcome, I'm Kelsey Wiskirkin. I'm WARP's Executive Director, and today we have the great pleasure of hearing about Local Cloth's Blue Ridge Blankets project. If you've ever been on a WARP panel discussion before, if you've ever attended, then you already know Judi Jetson, who's been our trusty moderator for probably going on 3 years now, Judi.
yeah, I think so.
So our program committee finally asked Judi to give a presentation with her team about what she does in North Carolina. So Judi will be stepping out of the role of moderator today and into the role of panelist and presenter. So we'll be hearing, as I said, about the Blue Ridge Blanket Project, which is sponsored by Local Cloth, which is a nonprofit in Asheville, North Carolina, and was founded by WARP member Judi Jetson. And Judi will be joined today by Donna Edwards, who is a fiber artist and weaver for the Blue Ridge Blanket Project, and also joined by Elizabeth Strub, who raises heritage breed sheep on her farm, Hobby Knob Farm near Asheville. And together, the three of them will give us an overview of this ambitious project of creating blankets that are entirely locally produced and revitalizing the fiber economy in Western North Carolina. Thank you three for being with us, and I think Judi's going to start us off.
Okay, but I wonder, Kelsey, do you want to do a little commercial for WARP first before we get started, just in case we have people on board today who aren't familiar with Weave a Real Piece?
That's a great idea, Judi. Thank you. I dove right in and forgot that I usually do
I
that. So
know, it's easy to do that. It's easy, I know.
if you're new to WARP, we are an international textile networking organization, and I'll put our website in the chat. I don't have it pulled up to screen share at the moment, but it's weavearealpiece.org. We have in the last few years since the pandemic, we have monthly virtual programs, both for members and these Saturday panel discussions, which are free and open to all. We have an annual meeting that's once a year where we connect together and just a number of resources, but our mission is to empower textile communities around the world. So thank you, Judi, for the reminder.
Sure. Okay, then I think I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and I'm at the end of the presentation rather than the beginning. Well, that's okay. I can make it start at the beginning. Alrighty. So welcome to our presentation about one of my brain children that is called the Blue Ridge Blankets Project. And I'll tell you how I got into that in just a minute. But the reason I call it Reconnecting Our Region's Textile Heritage is that all along the way, we discovered ways that the systems that used to be used in our region of the country and most other countries in the world, where weavers and spinners and dyers were all connected to the farmers, it has kind of gone by the wayside. And so this project has really been about rebuilding that network and learning what it's going to take to do it. First, I'll tell you just a few things about Local Cloth. We were founded in 2011 and immediately applied to become a 501c3 nonprofit. And our mission is to grow the fiber economy in our region, which translates to working to make it possible that fiber artists and farmers, designers, teachers, students, small-scale mills can all make a decent living. And that's an ambitious goal, but that's what moves us forward, and that's what underlies all of the different activities we've gotten involved with. Some of you may know Catherine Ellis. She's been a member on and off of Weave a Real Piece. Catherine was also one of our founders, and she started something called the Textile Study Group. That was the first thing we did, and had a regular meeting once a month, kind of like we're doing here on the WARP Zoom, just to hear from our members, to appreciate all the creative spirits we have in our region, and to connect wherever possible. The two ways that we concentrate on growing our economy are import substitution, which is pretty obvious, I think, but it means seeing if we can make things locally instead of buy them someplace else. And the second is to add value to local raw materials. And these are really the premises of rural economic development all over the world. It's just that it really hadn't been activated in the United States in the fiber area until now. You know, we've taken a lot of inspiration from the local agriculture, the local food programs in our region and around the world. And we thought, well, if people are willing to pay extra and buy into the idea of helping local farmers and eating local food, they should be willing to do that with clothing, right? Now, I mean, it's just natural. We are affiliated with the International Fiber Shed Organization. We started about the same time they did. And we also have become an education center of the Southern Highlands Craft Guild, which means that people, you know, focus on our teaching, which is sort of the second big area of our mission that came out. Our region is in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We're mostly in western North Carolina, but we have bits of East Tennessee, upstate South Carolina, and also northeastern Georgia that are part of our region. When we started, these are numbers from 2012, and we do need to update them, but hopefully that'll be a project for the coming year. But in 2012, we had more than 400 fiber artists in our region. That means people who are trying to make a living as fiber artists. That's a lot higher than most other parts of the country. In fact, we think per capita we have more fiber artists than any place else in the United States. We also have at least 2,500 hobbyists who pursue fiber arts. We have up to 80 galleries with fiber arts, textile-related shops, yarn shops. This is all familiar. These second two numbers came from something called the Census of Agriculture that's done every 7 years in the U.S. We discovered there were 462 fiber animal farms and more than 5,000 fiber animals. This really surprised us because the farmers all thought they knew all the farmers. And in fact, there are a lot more that show up on the Census of Agriculture than we even know. Right now, our database of farmers that we've contacted in some way with this project is about 200. So we still have plenty more growth to see. Interestingly, though, a lot of those fiber animal farms are raising sheep for meat rather than for their fiber. So we've grown an appreciation of what meat sheep do to the bottom line of a farm, which is important, as well as what their fiber can do in our blankets. We don't have very much cotton in our region, so we haven't really delved into that. A small number of schools and colleges teaching. It's less than 5 now, or 7 is probably 5. And we also have lost some of our textile mills just in the last 10 years. So the numbers are still going the wrong direction to give us the support that we need. Our main approach is to raise awareness, and that's so that locals and shoppers understand that they can buy fiber animal and fiber animal products. We want to make local textiles more available to the average person. We want to strengthen the economic viability of our local creative community and help reinvest in the textile industry. And finally, advocate for new markets and programs and services that add value to local products and create jobs. So how do we do this? Well, we do a lot of workshops. We're up to about 75 workshops a year. These are mostly either half-day or one-day workshops, although we do occasionally do some a little longer. But that's sort of our niche. We're in a region that has John Campbell Folk School, Penland School of Craft, and Aramont. So they're doing the more in-depth week-long and even 2-week workshops. But these shorter ones are appealing both to local fiber artists that want to pick up a new skill, a new wrinkle that they can incorporate into their own work, and also to visitors and hobbyists. We also do special events. The most popular one we've done is a fashion show, which takes a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun to do also. We also have an event that's called Fiber Field Day, although the name has changed over the last few years. But that's a place where you can go and buy raw fleece and talk to the farmers who raise the animals. We also have yarn and roving available there. But it really is basically for the raw materials. We also do an event that's probably our second most popular event. It's called Anything Fiber Sale, and it's like a fiber yard sale. It'll be, I think, August 2nd next year. I didn't put the 2024 date on my calendar, but if anybody's in the region, this is sort of an unbelievable event, is all I can say about it. People line up. It's the 27th, July 27th in 2024. So we have 40 or 50 vendors, and a lot of the guilds have booths because it's a good fundraiser for guilds. A lot of fun. We also do pop-up markets because we now have a retail shop, which we didn't have when we first started. We only opened this about 2 years ago because we found from our members that they didn't have a place to sell their products. Most galleries don't carry textiles, and more and more are now. We're helping to persuade galleries that textiles sell, but it's a slow process. So we have things for makers like local yarn and roving and braids, and then we also have finished wall art and hand woven and hand sewn fabrics. We're trying to build this part of our business of doing special events. This was a group of teachers of textiles from all over the state that were in town for a conference. And one of them called us and asked if we could plan something special for them. So they spent the morning in our studio dyeing with indigo. In the afternoon, they went to a farm and met alpacas and saw her projects that involve processing the yarn, the fiber, and making it into yarn and products. Also, we've got a couple of farms in our region that, besides her, that help. There's Good Vibrations that has goats, and then Two Roots Fiber Mill also gives tours and is interested in having visitors. So we think that tour business, as long as it doesn't take up too much of our time and energy, is a good way to help grow without having to have more space, because we're quickly running out of space. We moved into a 3,000 square foot space a little over 2 years ago, and now people are asking me, Judy, can you find us a bigger building? We need to expand. Can we kick the dentist out next door? It's a challenge, but it's the kind of challenge you love to have. Okay, so the blanket project, which is the main thing I'm here to talk about, and you don't have to have an organization like Local Cloth to do it. You can do a blanket project without the organizational infrastructure, but there are a lot of ways that it helps us. We received a grant from the Community Foundation because they'd watched our growth, and they'd seen publicity about us moving into a larger space, knew that we'd been around now more than 10 years, and felt like we were a safe investment. Community foundations are pretty conservative with their money. But they came to me and said, what would you like to do? What's the next step for Local Cloth? And I told them, well, I think we need to grow into our name. You need to be able to walk into the doors of Local Cloth and buy cloth that's locally made from local materials. And while that sounds easy and simple, it was anything but. First thing we had to do was find the fiber. We knew dozens of fiber animal farmers, but many of them didn't have enough fiber to sell, or their fiber was coarse. And what we really discovered we wanted for these blankets was a fine wool that we could then combine with alpaca for more softness, and mohair for shininess and strength. So we put the word out that through our newsletter. We do a newsletter twice a month. And one of the farmers called me. This is one of the 462 farms that wasn't growing sheep for fiber. It was for meat. And he said, I raise Dorset, and each year we shear them, and I've got about 700 pounds. Would you like it for your blankets? And of course, I didn't know how we could possibly use 700 pounds. We were only hoping to get like 150 total. But I said, well, let me try the Dorset. Can you bring a bag by next time you're in town? And so maybe a month later, he sent me an email that he was going to be in town. And I happened to be down at the studio that day. We were doing a inventory. And from the front of the shop, someone called up and said, Judi, your farmer's here. And I said, how do you know? And they said, well, he's pulling this enormous bag out of the back of his pickup truck and dragging it down the sidewalk with a rope. And I was like, oh my God. All right. So I went up to the front of the store, and there came Anthony in literally dragging this bag that must have weighed 300 pounds. It was like a body bag, only bigger, black, plastic, stuffed full of what was probably 20 fleece. When I said a bag, I was thinking like a little plastic garbage bag with one fleece in it, like most farmers have. But no, he has a whole different system. So we did end up using some of that Dorset. A lot of it we couldn't use for various reasons. It was full of sticks and straw and mulch and all kinds of things because they aren't being careful with where their sheep graze. But we were able to put some of that in our blankets, and we did discover that the fleece from animals raised for meat, whether it's Dorset, another one is Tunis that you might know, Rambouillet, those all have a nice bouncy wool that really makes a lovely lightweight blanket. So if you're ever wondering if you can use Dorset, the answer is yes. We had other farms we visited. Mary has an alpaca farm in the southern part of our region. She has 200 alpaca, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get all the alpaca I could ever want here. But it turns out that it was all too short. She had it sheared only about 2 inches long, and we had a 3-inch minimum so that we didn't have lengths of all different kinds of fibers, so some would stick out or fall out of the yarn. So that there were a lot of those kind of disappointing trips, but the one that's really kicked our butt the most is skirting. And I don't know if any of you know what skirting is, but I am now a skirting expert. I just want you to know. I've skirted, probably 500 pounds of fleece over the last 2 years, and more to come. And what that is taking off the short bits, the coarse bits, the parts that have, burrs that you can't get out, super muddy, dirty parts. Mostly it tends to be around the lower part, the legs and and near the belly of the sheep or the goat or the alpaca. And you want to take all of those things that aren't nice fleece out so that your fiber, when it goes to the mill, is all ready to be spun. You don't want to pay to ship all of that stuff. You don't want to pay for them to wash it. Just need to take it out. It's very hard at first. You're very dainty, but once people get going, it's great. So those were kind of just the early lessons that we learned as we began gathering fleece for both our sample blankets, and then also we did a production run of blankets this past year that I'll tell you about in a minute. Other thing that was a surprise to us was that when I made a timetable for this project, and any of you that have done project management know that's kind of one of the first things you do as you plan it out. I figured it would take, I asked a mill, how long does it take from the time the fiber comes in until it gets out? And they answered that question as though they didn't have a backlog. So, they said, well, maybe 30 days, maybe 2 months. But in fact, by the time we got around to sending it to the mill, all the mills had a backlog, some of them more than a year. So that was a big challenge to us. The project we thought would be done in 1 year actually took us 2 years to have blankets for sale. And then some of the mills in our region that we thought were possibilities for the place that could make our yarn closed. So, there's a lot of shifting sands when you do a project like this. And I guess the key piece of advice I would have is be nimble. There's always another way to do it, but it might cost more or take longer than you thought. So here we are. There's Beth, one of my partners in crime here at Local Cloth, and she and I have been down to this mohair or Angora goat farm several times to get fleece. The fleece are lovely. She shears twice a year. They're the right length for us. And as you can see, the animals are pretty tame. They don't mind people. And there I am on the right, one of the many fleeces that I've learned to love to skirt. I think that one's a Rambouillet that we just pulled out of the bag. Okay. The next group of slides, I'm going to turn to Elizabeth Strub, who owns Hobby Knob Farm in Weaverville, North Carolina, to tell you a little bit about her experience as a fiber animal farmer here, and then anything she wants to say about the blanket project. So Elizabeth, are you still with us? Would you unmute
There we
yourself?
go. I'm here.
Yeah, okay, great.
Muted. Okay. Hi, everyone. This is kind of exciting, talking to people long ways away and nearby. I, as the name says, call myself Hobby Knob Farm because I am really a hobby person. That means I'm not trying to make a living doing my sheep. It's really just for the love of the sheep. And also for years ago, finding an animal that was small and wasn't a money pit like a horse, and something my daughter could do along with me when she was young and small, and that I could do something with them other than just feed them and look at them in the pasture. And I went to our local fair that's in our regional state fair over here in the mountains, and met all these sheep people locally that were raising sheep, and all of them were women that were displaying. And my thought was, well, if they're doing this, I can too. So I started off with, met a couple of them, and I contacted them later after I'd done a lot of research. And in 2001, in 2000 and 2001, when I was researching, I didn't have internet. So I went to the library and got a lot of books and read as much as I could from the stories, how-to books, and talked to some people and got some sheep from someone who had been raising them for a long time in this area, quite a few years, so that I knew that they would be an animal suitable here. And so I didn't really start where I am now. I started off with just a few. I got a few more over the years, and my daughter and I showed sheep in our local wool sheep show. A lot of sheep shows are primarily meat sheep, but fiber folks here that had kids younger than mine years ago had started a wool sheep show at the Mountain State Fair. So we did that as long as she could, and she aged out. And then I decided I really liked her help, and I haven't really shown much anymore, but that was mostly long wool. So I started with a couple of crossbreeds just so I could kind of learn. They were mostly Cotswold, Border Leicester cross. I had one full Cotswold for the long wool, and then I got a ram, and then had a few more of those, but couldn't find any unrelated Cotswolds. I tried, I got a couple of Border Leicesters along the way. I even dabbled in a few Icelandic sheep for a couple of years, and decided they couldn't tolerate they were too much work in our weather to manage the issues that come up with sheep. I don't know, where everybody's level is, but the main problem with sheep anywhere is parasites because they eat grass, they eat on the ground, and parasites are everywhere. Even worse if they are added to by other ruminants that drop the same bugs in the parasites in the pasture. So that's one of the things you learn. There's a lot of learning curve. That's why I kind of started small. And even though I've been at it for a while, I still have occasional problems, and I sometimes don't catch something soon enough, and just things do happen. But I settled in on raising a breed called primarily the Jacob sheep. They're a conservation breed by the on the Livestock Conservancy list, and it's the American Jacob. There's also the British and Scottish type, but this is specifically the American Jacob, and it was considered a land race because I guess it came here and nothing else came and was added to it. It has not been changed to go into the meat supply, which is what so many sheep had been bred up, to be big, to make big lambs, and so you may not have fiber so much afterwards, and they're big, and they lose some of their really nice capabilities. But so with the Jacob, and I read up on them, and I looked at them at the fair, and I knew people that had them, and I went to we have a large regional fiber fair, not as big as New York and Maryland, but we have, it's called the Southeastern Animal Fiber Fair. And that's where I learned a lot more about the animals I was interested in by going to that before I had anything. I also learned about llamas there too. I got a couple of those. That was just for fun, but I do use some llama fiber in some of my things, but not so much my Jacob. But there was a woman there who, at the time, it was small, and you could get a little spot just on the wall in a chair with a little table and sell at SAF, which you cannot do anymore. And this woman had these nice bags made up of this mix of Jacob balls for spinning. I had already I'd learned to spin. Oh, I should back up just a tad. I really thought I was going to buy a couple of sheep after I learned to spin and just spin those sheep wool, but I got a little attached to the sheep, and I ended up getting too many more sheep than I could handle spinning wise. And so that's why I need local cloth to help me find homes for it all. But anyway, she had made this little set, because if you don't know the Jacob, you see the pictures here. They're not only are they horned, all the ewes and the rams, the boys and the girls are all horned, and they're black and white, or we have a shade that's called lilac, that's kind of a light sort of brownish hue that really fades out as they age. Sometimes they have a little more brownish tint to them, but you can divide out the colors. Oh, and we also have a specific range in the Jacob, 15% black to white, and no more than 85%. So if you have an all black sheep, that's probably had some crossbreeding in the past, and it's showing its nasty head. And so same thing for white. So those that are solid colors aren't registerable, because they are a spotted sheep, and so that's what they need to be. So, but the fleeces are quite different. They're not. That's another thing from showing in some other breeds, like the long wools with the Border Leicester and the Cotswold, is the judges look for a sheep that has a consistent fleece from front to back, and that's sometimes not in your breed, and that's the way it is somewhat with Jacobs. But also the fleece character is different, so it's what makes it kind of interesting. It's not a bad thing at all, but the micron count, there's sort of a medium fine at the lower end, 23 microns at the smallest, and it's really more specific with the rams. And then I think it's 35 for the corsets. We don't have much of that anymore, because it's certainly useful, but most hand spinners, people making products, they want a little finer medium fleece. So, but they do have a lot of different character, which also is kind of interesting. So you can take those black and white colors apart. You can get black. So I had a black ball and I had a white ball. And then you can mix different ranges of the black and white together and get different shades of gray. I think maybe, I don't know what my next picture is, Judy.
It's the baby, mamas and babies.
Oh, go ahead and put that one on, because that's cute too. Go ahead and do that. That's another reason I love these sheep, because the babies, they're so small and they are such great mothers. And the babies are born I'm very hands off. And I know that these sheep are perfectly capable. They've been doing this for thousands of years. They can do it without me being in there with a rug on the floor and, doing everything. But I do pay attention. And if I notice someone having trouble, either out in the pasture or if I've already brought her in, I do intervene. I've only had to do that twice in the 20 years. Well, I have Jacob 15 years, but even in the 20 years, I've had other sheep and had some lambs. So that makes them a very easy hands-off type breed. They're excellent mothers. They're very protective. You can see on that picture on the left where the baby is right next to mama, and they stay by their side, really carefully for the first, 4 to 5, 6 weeks. And then they start to find their buddies and have a really good time. But The babies are really cute, but the fiber's great too. So I told you about the mix, and we have a slide coming up. So here's one of the things that happens when you have a sheep breed, a wool sheep breed, is they do have to be sheared. And I get that done. Most of all the Jacobs are just sheared once a year. And the long wools, the one on the right is one of I do have a couple of BFL border lusters because it's different fiber, and they're usually a real gentle breed, and they don't get too big either. So they often have to get sheared twice, but the Jacobs get sheared once a year, and they look quite interesting. And then just for a note of something I was going to include, the cost of raising sheep. It's when you're selling yarn from buying yarn from someone like me, there's a lot of costs that have gone into it. And that's the issue I think that a lot of us have had over these years, is everybody got used to buying commercial yarn from somewhere else that was really inexpensive. Of course, there's some really nice commercial yarns out there now that aren't, but so we're kind of in the middle there. I have feed costs some year round. I have hay that has to be bought in the wintertime here, and I try to keep them on grass as long as I can. That's what's nice about the Jacob. And I do have enough room that I can move them around from pasture to pasture, which is really the best way to keep your sheep healthy and your land too. And then occasionally there's vet bills. Sometimes there's some medications. There are some health maintenance things you do to help keep your sheep healthy. And then the processing, if you're going to have something done with it, when you have a larger amount, some people are really good. I'm just not as like, I can't just work on fleece all day long. I guess I have a little bit of ADD, and I like to do different things. So it's just easier for me to get it all together and figure out what I want and send it to one of my processors that I like to use. And they're all small mills. Maybe the one in Michigan isn't quite so small, but they've been at it for a long time. They've got a lot of experience, and they're really, really good. But I also use small family mills that they've set up the mini mills, or set up whatever kind of mill in their garage or in the building they built, whatever. And they do really nice work. So not so many around here in our area, like Judi mentioned, but there is a small one in North Georgia, and then there's the one in Tennessee. But again, it takes, most of these people are all a year at least. In fact, I'm waiting for a run to get started that I put on her list in last August, a year ago August. So I'm just now going to be getting that back probably at the end of November, beginning of December. So that's one of the things, is your turnaround time waiting to have something to sell. So so you have to, I did send you a picture of I guess the darker one, I think. Anyway, so here's one of the things that happens. This is what I was talking about, the different mix. When you have the black and the white, and if you have more white to black, of course, you get more of a light gray. And that light gray on the right was over dyed with madder. We also have quite a few people in natural botanical dyers around here, and I've been playing with it, although I still like acid dyes. It's quicker. But it's really nice, because that's the other advantage to having color, is you can over dye, and you can get different shades, or you can get heather looks. So white isn't always the thing to always have anymore, and because you can do so many other kind of mixes. Let's see. So as I got involved in local cloth quite a few years ago when they first started with their fiber field day. I did that a couple times, and then I kind of got busy getting my daughter graduated from college and all that, high school and all that, and I didn't do as much. So I got back to it more in, a couple of years before COVID, and did some more of the sales, the Fiber Fest sales, and I did a anything fiber sale day. And right before COVID, I realized that the facility that Local Cloth did have was had a dye lab day or dye workshop day. So I started going to those because it was a good way for me to learn new things, to be around other people that enjoy what I like, and get more acquainted, rather than just going to this one day sale and then not really doing anything again. So that's been a real, it's helped me a lot to learn how to do new things and get ideas from other people, and just be part of our community and learn what other fiber arts people are doing. We have so many great creative people. And then Judy's, this plan, we've talked about yarn and things like that, but she went right to blankets, which is great. They're beautiful. And I am excited to have some Jacob in, wow, next year. Anyway, she's already got it from me because I only shear once a year. So you have to get it while I have it. Yeah, so I'm excited to have Jacob in a natural color blanket coming up the next year. So I know I'll be around. There'll be some questions and stuff. I think that's probably, is that my last picture?
Yes, it is.
Coming up? Okay. I hope I've covered just about all the bases, but maybe some of you'll have some questions for me afterwards.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. As you can see, farmers get kind of enthused about what they're doing with local cloth, and that's important because that energy keeps us moving forward on these projects. After it leaves the skirting room down at Local Cloth, and we take over any space we can during skirting season, which this year has been both spring and fall. I took the summer off so I could take a vacation, do some travel. But then it goes to the mill, and the picture on the left is the small mill up in East Tennessee that we use, and that's the machine that turns fluffy, clean wool into bats. So it's going through on the one side, and it's already been scoured, it's already been blended, and now it's turning into bats, which will then go through another machine until they get to this stage, which is going from barrels of roving, and you can see that roving is in those nice little round tubes, goes through the air and back down the other side and is spun into yarn. That's clearly a larger mill than the one on the left. The mill up in East Tennessee that does some of our spinning is, I think they probably have enough cones to spin like maybe 16, where the one you're looking at here is 2 or 3 times that big. Then the next thing is to have part of it put into hanks for dyeing, and part of it then is kept natural. And we have a natural dyer who lives in our region. In fact, we have several people who have natural dye gardens where they raise the plants that can be used to do this process. Indigo is a favorite. We also use madder root, which takes 2 years to grow, at least in our climate. That gives a nice orangish red. We use weld. We use black walnuts for brown. So there's a variety of local materials, but we try to keep a fairly limited palette because that keeps consistency in the colors. So after it's dyed and dried, then we go to the weavers. And there are hundreds of weavers in our region. I belong to the Weavers Guild here, and there's close to 200 people, at least 150 members. And so I thought we'd have no problem finding weavers for the blankets, but in fact we did, because most of them don't have wide enough looms. A lot of them are retired and they have a smallish loom. Baby wolves are really popular, or Dorsets. So they could weave scarves, but we wanted blankets. So we went looking again, knocking on doors, and we have 2 colleges in our region that have weaving programs. One is Haywood Community College, which Donna Edwards, your next speaker, attended, and they have a certificate program in textiles. Also at Warren Wilson College, which is a 4-year school, sort of over in the Black Mountain area, they have a weaving program. So that's one of the colleges that Phyllis Alvick wrote a lot about. Actually, that was the book that she was best known for, with all the settlement schools in the Appalachian Mountains. And Warren Wilson was one of those schools. It's been around for a long time, and the idea was mountain young people needed to get a college education in order to be able to make a decent living. And they have service programs that all throughout the college and all different topics, but they have 4 different craft programs, and one of them is weaving. So those students have a weaving period, much like other schools might have a class during that period or a laboratory, and they have a house full of looms and spinning wheels, and the students there learn how to weave and have big looms. So students from Haywood often had their own looms, and they didn't need to use the ones at Warren Wilson, but there were a lot of other weavers who needed that. So I'm just about to turn to Donna, but first I wanted to show you some of the blankets because we've been talking about them, but you haven't seen what they look like yet. The blankets on the left were 100% Shetland wool and all natural colors. We expected when we made these samples that we would have enough Shetland to do a production run of at least 50 blankets. And the fact was we didn't find the Shetland that we thought was out there. Either those farmers have changed to another sheep, or they're keeping all the wool for themselves. I still don't know why what we thought was there isn't there, but you just have to move on. So we went with all blankets made from the Blue Ridge blend, which are the samples on the right-hand side. And they're fairly traditional patterns. We had a consultant who used to be the blanket designer for Churchill Weavers that helped us with the designs. And these are the blankets that were then woven this year and are for sale right now, local cloth. Next up is Donna, who's been a blanket weaver for both the samples and the production run that we have for sale right now. And Donna's going to tell you a little bit about herself and her experience working on the blankets.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, so as Judy mentioned, most of the weavers came from Haywood and from Warren Wilson. And I was a diploma student from Haywood and was very excited. We were all very excited to know that Local Cloth was getting ready to weave blankets and that they wanted our help because it offered us an opportunity, first of all, for paying gig to weave, which is something that many of us had not had before. And also it gave us an opportunity to really appreciate and understand what it was like to weave for a commission or to weave production. What were the steps here? So it's been a great opportunity. Let me tell you a little bit about the Haywood program because I'm really enamored with it. Haywood is at a community college, so it is in-state. Tuition is reasonable. And it's a great program whether you want to take 2 years and get an associate's degree and then move on and get an art degree, because it allows you to build a portfolio, or whether you want to work for the diploma and then go out and start your own business, because it provides, I think I took 3 semesters of design work, and then we had a smattering of business courses in addition to being in the weaving lab, 10 to 15 hours a week. So that was the foundation that I was able to bring to the Blue Ridge project. Next slide, please. So as Judy mentioned, for weavers, the project came in 2 phases. Phase 1 was working the samples, and we were given a pattern book, and we wove 2 blankets from the pattern book, and then we were allowed to make a design of our own for the 3rd blanket, which was wonderful. And then we came around again in the production process. And so, and the process was very similar, but we got to hit it twice. So the time we became production weavers, we knew what we were doing because we'd walked it before. So just to give you a sense of some technical pieces here, it takes about 6,300 yards to weave 4 blankets. They came to us in a bag with some instructions, and Melanie Wilder, who is the supervisor for the Warren Wilson weaving crew, was instrumental in sort of keeping the weavers organized. And I will tell you that we all thought it had a lovely hand. It was just wonderful to work with. Next slide, please. So some of the technical pieces about the design and that helped us with the dressing, they were very smart designs that allowed for production. So it was an EPI of 12. And of course, as Judy mentioned, you needed a pretty wide loom, so at least 46 in the reed. And then it was straight twill. Regardless of the pattern, they were all straight twill. And so we were given, the warp designs were such that you could weave a lot of different patterns from that same warp design. And I thought that was very smart. It takes about 8 to 10 hours to dress a loom for 4 blankets. Next slide, please. So once you've got the loom dressed, you're ready to weave. And this is my loom on the right here, looking at it from the back beam. It takes about 3 to 4 hours to weave a blanket, and because it's not that it's a very easy pattern to weave. So I think I could easily weave, I could dress the loom and weave 4 blankets in a week. 40 hours, that would not be a problem. And just some more pictures here to give you a sense of what the blanket looked like, you know, on the loom here with that lovely twill pattern. And then this is Rachel's loom. Looks like a lovely place to sit. Next slide. So once the blankets are woven, then of course there's the finishing, and all of the blankets had a 4 to 6 inch overhand knot. It took us about 30 minutes to an hour to tie them. And then of course they had to be wet out in a cool bath. And because we are all cottage weavers, we were we were laughing at ourselves. We were putting them in bathtubs and big tubs, and then, you know, pulling them out. They were heavy, very, very heavy blankets, wet, and a lot of lanolin came out of them. So some of them, mine got 2 wets just to make them nice and clean. And then if we hit the final slide here, Judy, you can get a sense of what it was like to dry them. So they were huge, big blankets that wouldn't necessarily sit on my line. So I put mine out on my lawn to dry. They just become a totally different blanket. As you know, when you take wool and you wet it, it puffs up, and the hand became even more wonderful, and they had a luxurious sheen to them, and they were beautiful. So it's a project that was well worth my time, and I'm so glad that I got to be involved with it. I think that's my last slide.
Okay, thanks, Donna.
You're welcome.
For those of you interested in numbers, I put together this slide that lets you know approximately what it cost to make our sample blankets, which was, we figured, about $327 each. And we've been working with the Grovewood Gallery, which is a fine craft gallery in our region, to help us figure out how to price them, because we wanted them to be the kind of blankets that someone who came to a fine craft gallery would want to buy. That was sort of our target customer. We didn't want to try to compete with the people who were, you know, shopping at the discount stores, because we never could price-wise. So what they told us is basically they doubled the price of whatever our cost was in order to sell it. So we established a price that would be about twice $327 or $650. But then when it came right down to putting them up on the market, our first batch of blankets, I was just a little afraid that was too high. So we have one blanket, one style that's $495, and the other is $595. So maybe we'll sneak our way up to $650 next year. But this is, we figured we could always raise our prices, but it would be pretty hard to make them lower. But if you go back up to the cost of the fiber, is not the most expensive part. But what we've tried to do is build in a little incentive to farmers to skirt their own fleece, hoping that they would be willing to do it for a little bit more per pound, and some of them are. Thank you, Elizabeth. You're one of them. You know, it's just so much easier for us to do our job as kind of the middleman if the fleeces are already skirted. So our biggest cost, well, it's hard to say, but $38 a pound approximately to spin that fiber into yarn. So you know where all the cost of your yarn is going. It's not to the farmer, it's to the mill or to the dyer. The dyers are paid $32 a pound, and that's probably going to go up. And the weavers, we had some woven this year by a semi-automatic operation in Western Mass called Bedfellow Blankets. And some of you probably know Peggy Hart. She's written quite a bit. She's been doing this for a long time. And so they wove some of our blankets, and then our local hand weavers were paid $135 a blanket for their work. So that's kind of how it all breaks down. And we took them on tour, and that year we had to wait for the mills to have time to process our fiber into yarn. On the left is a display we had at the Southern Highland Craft Guild's Fall Fair last year. We also exhibited them at individual fiber festivals. We had some at the Visitor Information Center on the interstate nearby. And we intended to have one at the WARP annual meeting, but I didn't end up getting to go. So you didn't get to see him last year, but maybe next year. Maybe I'll bring one with me to Colorado. And so our final product is we have 74 blankets that were available for sale. So far, 24 have been sold. So about a third of them are gone and 2/3 left. We named the patterns after the designs after local landmarks, either cities or like the Pisgah Forest, the French Broad River, just to have sort of a feel of the region and the names of the blankets. Each one of them has a satin embroidered label on it that has washing instructions and has its name and the year. And we're making up sample books to be available if we get people interested in a custom order. Let's say, well, I want a blanket, but it needs to be queen size for my bed. Happily, we have weavers who have looms almost big enough to do that. I don't know. What do you think, Donna? You
Maybe
could probably do a double bed. I'm not sure about queen size, but we could figure out how to do that.
yeah.
Okay, so what's next for us, now that we've gotten our first batch of blankets finished and available for sale, all that money that comes in is going to go toward buying wool, alpaca, and mohair for next year's blankets. We have 3 different R&D projects we're doing next year, in addition to our regular woven blankets, and that fleece has all been sent off today, I think, to a mill in Vermont, Green Mountain, that's going to be producing the yarn. We want to try a gray wool, and it's a gray fiber. It's going to have wool, alpaca, and mohair in it, and that'll have Elizabeth's Jacob. Probably some of Susan's Montadale will be in it too. We're going to try making some roving for our indie dyers because we do sell quite a bit of roving, but there is no local roving available, no such thing. So we have some tencel that's not local, but we'll use Rambouillet and tencel and maybe blend it with alpaca. I haven't decided yet, and have a local roving. And that'll probably be for sale by spring. And then the third experiment we want to try this year is a lopi yarn. Some of you have been to Iceland, you know about the lopi that's made from the Icelandic sheep there. Well, we've discovered quite a few local farmers that raise lopi, or Icelandic sheep. And also some of the ones that raise Shetland is more the primitive breed that has a long outer coat and a short inner coat. And so lopi is a yarn that's made while those 2 coats are kept together, and it's spun in a woolen style, and it's spun in singles. So we know that one of the national brands has been selling Let Lopi yarn for the last couple of years, and they do quite well with it. And so there's nothing local. None of our farmers are making lopi, so we thought we'd give that a try and see if there's a market for it. So we sort of can't stand it when we meet a farmer with a nice looking fleece. We have to figure out what can we do with this. And that's going to be the what keeps us interested at Local Cloth and some of the people working on it, the farmers. We're always going to be trying different experiments now that we've started. So far, we're not planning to do shawls or scarves because there's so many others who do that. But this roving and yarn of local fibers, I think, will also be well received. So I'm always trying to figure out a way to do this skirting. We have a skirting team of all volunteers. Some of them are Local Cloth members. Some of them are just friends people drag along. But that's been a continuing question of how to do it. I was talking to Kelsey the other day, and I remember a presentation that I think I moderated for this group maybe a year ago of a Navajo Nation co-op that had been developed that was sending out skirters with shearers. And so that's one possibility that I want to talk to our shearers about, if they'd be open to having a team of skirters go with them, because if it could all be done when it was in the field, what a wonderful experience that would be both for us and for the farmers. Everything would be done, especially for the ones that want to sell their fiber to local cloth. So that's something I'm going to try and work on next year. We also need to get more farmers in our database. We've got some of our 2024 orders on the books with mills. I still have to decide where I'm going to take the gray. And then finally, we've identified 2 projects that really need advocates in our region. And that is to increase the availability of wider looms. There are a lot of people who would weave for us, but they've either given up their looms or they don't have one big enough. So as we grow, as we increase the amount of fiber we have and the amount of blankets we need, we think we need to find a place where these looms could live, sort of like a dormitory for looms, right? Where if you had a big loom and you weren't using it at home, you could donate it, or maybe you could rent a little bit of space to keep it to use when you wanted to, or you could even rent time on your loom to someone who wanted to weave commission projects like these, but didn't have a loom that was big enough. I don't know any examples of this to speak to particularly, but there's a few other places in our region that have loom collections that people can weave on. So we're talking to them about where to get big looms. Do they get them? What do they do with them? We see that in our future, and we just haven't figured out how to do it yet. We don't have enough room in our space at Local Cloth to have these looms. Otherwise, I would have done it already. But I think I need a warehouse type space, a clean warehouse, no woodworkers, where we could have looms. And then finally, we need to encourage farmers and other entrepreneurs who are interested in developing another small mill in our region. I think our region could actually stand 2 or 3 small mills. There's such a backlog here. So in addition to actually producing fiber and blankets, we also want to be advocates for these other projects. So that's sort of our story of what I got myself into when I said we need to grow into our name. You know, it's never a simple process, but I wanted to share this today, hopefully to encourage some of you to try to do something similar in your own region. If you don't know a fiber shed organization or organization like ours, well, really there's nothing like Local Cloth, I have to be honest, but if you want to know if there's a fiber shed organization in your region, you can go to fibershed.com on the internet and look at the affiliates listing, and you can see all the different places they are in the United States. We've had several other fiber shed groups make presentations here, but most of them aren't quite as ambitious as ours. I'm not quite sure why that happened, but that's how it is. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Kelsey, to handle any questions that we might have.
Great. Thank you, Judi. I'm going to go ahead and look here in the chat for a few questions. Let's see. The first question came from Maggie, and I think is for Elizabeth. How has the recent weather pattern affected the animals and their health in wool?
Well, so I really haven't had any drastic change in fiber, but of course I haven't sheared my Jacobs this year since spring. So I get hands on them. They're a little crunchy on the outside. I don't coat my fleeces. I used to. There's a lot of people that will coat them, and it's breathable, but the coats are expensive. They have to be changed out as the fleece grows. And with this horn breed, they tear them up before I can get enough use out of them. And so I just try to do the best I can. And they, basically they get sometimes a little weathered on the ends, but it hasn't ever really impacted anything. The problem that you have more of for me is this year, which hasn't really been a big of issue. And I'm not quite sure if it was really weather related or not, is I had a little more problems with parasites this year, mostly in my young lambs, which is when you do, but it was like not really young. It was like when they were about 4 or 5 months old. And I am still trying to get weight on a couple. I just don't usually have that kind of problem. And I have a suspicion it's not necessarily weather. Usually when we have really dry weather, the parasites kind of go dormant, but then when it rains, they kind of perk back up. And we haven't had a whole lot of rain this summer. especially not now. So I guess I'm just pretty fortunate. The Jacob breed is pretty adaptable. They're all over the country and all over the United States, and they live well in different areas. And it hasn't really impacted fleece yet that I can tell. Nothing that may not wash off. As far as you know, the tips and things.
Thank you, Elizabeth. There is another question about sheep specifically. Are you seeing meat sheep farmers modifying methods to also have sellable wool?
I could take that question,
Yeah.
Kelsey. And in fact, I said the other day, I feel like I'm turning into a volunteer extension agent because of this project. Because honestly, extension agents in our region know very little about sheep. If they know about animals, it's about cattle. That's been the major focus. Some parts of the country are a little bit more sheep oriented, but not so much here. And I've actually had conversations with the meat sheep farmers when if I go back to their farms, which I did recently. We had a photo shoot at one for a magazine article that's going to be coming out about this project. And I said to them, because I bought fleece, this was Blackthorn Farm, which is a very entrepreneurial young couple. They're both chefs. They have multiple Airbnbs on their property. They're raising meat sheep. They have about 100 head, but mixed breed, Dorset and Rambouillet and Tunis and a whole variety of Textile is another one. And we did buy some fleece from them for our first run of blankets. And a lot of it was not usable because it had so many burrs and thorns from the field. And so we discarded it or we rejected it as we went through. And the wife was standing with us as that happened. But they didn't really ask what could we do to make it better. So I just thought it was my turn to tell them when I went back for the second time and saying, you know, if you would do a little pasture management, if you would try to get rid of some of those noxious weeds that get into the fleece, your fleece more of it would be usable. And so they're open to hearing it, but whether they're going to change it or not, time will tell. What seems to be more fruitful is to start with young farmers and recommend that they consider these breeds that we call dual purpose sheep, which are CVM, which is the same as a Rommeldale or Montadale, Tunis, Rambouillet, animals that are large enough to produce a fair amount of meat when they're sold in the markets, but also have a fine fleece. And I think that that's a way to go if you can manage animals of that size. Obviously, like the Jacobs that Elizabeth had and the Shetlands are much more easy to physically maneuver around than some of these larger meat sheep that might weigh several hundred pounds. But it seems like it's easier to help the new ones see a different way than it is to change the old ones' tricks, so to speak.
Great. Thank you, Judi. You've also talked a bit about the challenges, you know, with finding mills locally. There's a question from Sharon. She wants to know if you've heard of Gaston College Mill. Are you acquainted with Jordan Masters at West Virginia University, who's developing a small and expensive mill?
Gaston College, I think, is focused primarily on cotton. I don't think they have the equipment for wool. At least they didn't the last time I was in touch with them, Sharon. And I don't know about Jordan Masters at West Virginia, so thank you. That's a good lead. But again, the question would be, is this a mill that could process wool or is it more cotton? Because that's your stock in trade, right?
Right, but no, it's wool. It's definitely ready to go for wool. I think we're gonna have to stand in line to purchase because, excuse me, he's just doing prototypes right now. But I think the cost is going to be under $5,000. So that does make it a lot more available to us at that price. But yes, I'll give you his contact info. I think
that would be great. I was just flipping over for my notepad to get it down.
Yeah, he's Central Appalachia, sorry, fiber shed.
Okay.
And one thing One thing I love, Judy, that you shared when we had our call a little earlier this week is that I think really illustrates your sensitivity to the local community, is that some of the local mills, you don't want to necessarily clog up their sort of their time frame, because there are other local fiber producers that are relying on them, and you're actually working at such a large scale at this point for the local community that you have to be careful about pushing those other producers down the line.
Right, you are. The load of fiber that the one in East Tennessee is doing for us right now, it's called Two Roots, Alpaca and Fiber Mill. They're processing 75 pounds of fine wool, alpaca, and mohair. That's going to be sort of the first batch of 2024 blankets. And it's taking them practically a month to do. It's basically ties up their whole mill for a month. So that's the deal. Is we wanted to have a mill big enough to do that, a little bigger than the small mills. So you're going almost the other way with this $5,000 mill. On the other hand, that's something a farmer might be able to have on their farm. Someone that has a farm, let's say the size of Elizabeth's, that might be very attractive.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think despite all of the challenges, this project is really such a beautiful example of everything that FiberShed is about: a fully grown, produced local product that is really engaging the community in so many facets. So thank you so much to all three of you for sharing about it today.
Thanks for asking. It's been our pleasure.
Judi, it's great to also get to hear about your work, as so many of us have known you in this moderator role for several years. So thank you for stepping into that this month.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Happy
you all.
Thanksgiving.
Thanks.
Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thank you all for being here.